York City itself. So, Vedesh, can you tell us a little bit about the New York City Economic Development Corporation, how we work with asset management, the various agencies that we currently work with, and what your challenge areas are?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So, New York City Economic Development Corporation, I guess our primary mission or our vision is to continue to grow our current economic pillars, which are primarily finance, media, fashion, technology, and others, and continue to nurture those emerging economic sectors that will continue to boost their jobs for the residents of New York City. So we do that in lots of ways. We provide physical infrastructure in terms of capital improvements. The most recent ones that comes to mind are the Cornell Tech campus on Roosevelt Island, where you were in charge of actually funding the infrastructure needs, and then Cornell came and built the campus on top of it. Through their education campus, will continue to pump out graduates to attract talent to New York City, also attract companies to work within New York City. In terms of my day-to-day function and how it kind of relates to asset management and real estate, I work with a number of agencies from both the state, federal, and obviously locally here in New York City. So at the federal level, I deal mostly with the Army Corps of Engineers, or FEMA. Believe it or not, Hurricane Sandy happened in 2012. We're still dealing with Hurricane Sandy related type of work orders and improvements across New York City, and resiliency efforts surrounding that as well. But also at the state level, we work with this agency called SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, which is equivalent to New York City Landmark Preservation Commission. Then we also work with the DEC if there's any waterfront infrastructure project that we do on the waterfront. And go down to the C level, you're talking about FDNY, DOB, Department of Buildings, Fire Department, and our sister agencies or quasi-government agencies just like EDC. We're talking about Con Edison, National Grid. So my day-to-day function, I interact with any one of these agencies throughout a project lifecycle for whatever permanent reason, whatnot. So that's a really long way of saying that I deal with a lot of people, a lot of processes, and a lot of bureaucracy to begin with. So technology is welcome to actually help facilitate some of these conversations and some of these efforts surrounding some of these real estate transactions that we might do and construction processes that we might encounter. In terms of blockchain technology and how it could potentially come in to solve some of the pain points I've seen in the industry, I will break it down into 4 categories, if I may. One would be insurance, tenant improvements, payments, and I would say probably title reporting. Mm-hmm. So let's work backwards. In terms of property title report, obviously we do a lot of financial transactions, buying real estate, selling real estate, but also we also at EDC with the Office of Management and Budget as well, that's our bank for the city of New York. Whenever a financial transaction needs to take place, when the city's buying a property or help facilitate a transaction on behalf of a nonprofit, we usually request a property title report from that existing property that's going to be part of this transaction. And some of the issues I've seen over these transactions of lifespan surrounds property title is that there's sometimes errors, there's deficiencies, and sometimes there's fraud. So that information, they all exist across different agencies and sometimes different private entities and different databases, and they live in isolation. Blockchain technology could be that solution that kind of pull all of this together. So how does that affect me in terms of delivering the projects on time within budget? The resources that's needed to kind of facilitate those type of conversations across all agencies, it's incredible. From a cost standpoint, because you have to pay someone to fix those errors, you got to pay someone to actually go do research and dig up some of these property missing documentation, and the most important resources is time. I know we have a few electeds in the room, one particular, but as soon as you're elected to office, there's expiration date on your term. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get a project through within that term, it makes sense to improve these inefficiencies within government to kind of serve not just you and your agendas, but also the people that you ultimately serve. And to get projects through these processes that blockchain technology could help facilitate some of those transactions. The next one would be insurance. If you're doing business with a city, we have some very high insurance requirements. And we're very detailed within the overall contract what those insurance requirements are. When we pass it down to the vendor or the contractor, whomever, to kind of make sure that they follow these outlines, these guidelines. And in return, what we currently have in place are certificate of insurance. It's basically a one-page or two-sheet document that says we have coverage for general liability, auto, whatever it might be, excess liability. And these are the limits, these are the terms for occurrence. And we usually accept that. We can usually request the policy itself, but that's the thick document. And if you're a project manager and you're managing like 20 projects, and for you to go through all these insurance policies for multiple subcontractors, it's a job in and of itself. So to a certain extent, we're kind of accepting these documents with a level of trust, and there's an inherent risk of that. And one of the common issues I encountered while on some of the cases that didn't necessarily worked out for the better was that whenever an incident happens on some of these projects and we need to activate essentially insurance policy, and you kind of peel back the layers, there's a lot of exclusions within these policies. And you think you're covered for something, but you're not covered. So where I kind of foresee blockchain technology kind of come in is potentially pulling all these parties involved in this insurance transaction from both the government, from the private vendor, from the broker and the insurance company itself, to have all the information up front within one area. These are the city requirements. Can you meet them? And if an X and Y, Z incident happened, are we covered? That is still a world that's a little bit mystified at the moment in terms of just communication and transparency and how these deals are being struck. So there's that application. The next one would be payments. I think payments, if the day that we have a government transaction, financial transaction on blockchain, that day, whenever that happened, we made it with blockchain. We've definitely made it. Because as the system currently exists, it takes about 60 to 90 days for, if you're a vendor doing business with a city, to submit a payment invoice, and then that invoice has to get floated up to your prime contractor, who ultimately hold the contract with the city. That's about 30 days. When it comes to the city, for an additional 30 days review, sometimes longer, depends if there's issues with payment or whatnot. And then once the issue kind of issued the check or push the payment button and to give it back to the prime of the job, they have to disseminate that money down to the subcontractors. That's potentially another 30 days. There's just processes, there's paperwork, there is a lot of inefficiencies surrounding that 90-day cycle, let's call it. And quite frankly, the businesses that stand to lose the most within this overall cycle are small businesses. Because small businesses don't have the cash flows to sustain them for an entire quarter. They need, as soon as their service is rendered, need payment within a realistically time frame. I think blockchain technology could potentially come in and help facilitate those transactions a little bit better and kind of get rid of some of the check and balances, because the inherentness of the blockchain technology would give us that comfortability to know that this check and balances are in place to release smart contracts, etc. And I'm losing track. I said 4, so I mentioned 3. So property title report, did I mention that? Yep. So insurance, payments, and tenant improvements. So this is something that's close to home to me because I deal with it very frequently. NYC EDC, the asset management division, we currently own about 150 plus properties throughout the 5 boroughs. And as from an economic standpoint, the reason why we own these assets is to essentially, from a construction standpoint, to renovate it. They're usually dilapidated assets, and then we kind of renovate it and bring it back to life, and then rent the space at market rate or below market rate. And the incentive attached to that is that we're supporting industry to grow, where if you're a small business, let's say you're a blockchain business and you're looking for a space to rent, but the market, the current price of leasing a square foot of market space is above your budget, you can't necessarily buy it. You will come to the city if there's an initiative or if there's a program in place to support that sector. We will come in and submit an application to our leasing arm of the asset management division, and we will help you get that space. But obviously, we want to see that you're going to be producing jobs. You're also bringing some high quality jobs, and you're kind of basically going to grow as an industry within our assets. So let's say you have a lease with one of our current buildings, and you want to do improvements on that space. Currently, as it works, how it works is you're a tenant, you have to submit a permit application to EDC, and then we have to sign off on the improvements that you want to make, and then we say to give you the green light, and then you kind of go through the various city agencies, and then once the work is done, you will have to come back to us and tell us you have all the government paperwork sign off, et cetera, et cetera. In the ideal world, that's how it should work. There's gaps between communications between government agencies, whether you have to get sign-offs from DOB, FDNY, or any other type of agency that you're involved in, landmarks or SHPO, and sometimes that loop doesn't necessarily get closed. So sometimes we don't know if you're committed on if you're fully abiding to the incentives of the initiatives, such as creating jobs. So if you were able to communicate with other agencies in terms of employment to make sure that you're actually committed to the requirements of the lease and the program that we set up in place to take advantage of some of these below market rate space. It gets very cumbersome. There's a lot of effort involved again, and there's a lot of time kind of wasted, in my opinion, just going back and forth and the research involved. To have a blockchain or a protocol in place to kind of help facilitate those type of transactions, those conversations, to have it at a central location where all parties part of that negotiation or that transaction could see the central point of where things are kind of being addressed or not being committed or fully committed to by the tenants or even by the city themselves. That's another improvement using the blockchain protocol could help facilitate.
Thank you. That was really helpful. That went into the different areas in terms of how blockchain currently exists, but essentially what the workflow currently is that you have at EDC and how you work across agencies, and what some of the challenge areas are if you're thinking about asset management and real estate. And before we open it up to the public, the last area that we're going to go